Hi, my name is Didier. Welcome to the lab. We are in Paris at La Maison du Whisky. And today we're going to talk about American single malt. So for that, we got in touch with our friends over at Westward in the US. Hi guys, how you doing?
Hi, it's Miles from Westward Whiskey in Portland, Oregon. I'm the head blender and head distiller. Here to answer a few questions and tell you a little bit about what we do here in the Pacific Northwest, making our American single malt.
All right, so now let's find out more about American single malt whiskey. All right, so the US obviously is known for bourbon, maybe a little rye whiskey, but there is some malts and some single malts coming out of the US now, and it's quite a recent trend, I believe.
Now, typically the US is known for its bourbon and its rye. Bourbon, of course, being a predominantly corn spirit. That has a lot to do with location, where corn is grown, where rye is grown in the country. A lot of rye is grown along the East Coast, bourbon down around the South and Midwest. And so, that's where a lot of whiskey sprang up. A lot of farming was done around there, and that's where we saw bourbon really become, I guess what you could say, a very well-known American spirit. For us here in the Pacific Northwest, we're in the northwest corner of the country. This is where over 70% of the barley that's grown for malting in the country is actually cultivated and produced right here in this area. So for us, single malt is the whiskey that we want to make in this area because it speaks to the region. It is a true whiskey of the elements. And so we are now seeing a lot more producers making single malt, and we're going to put America on the world map for the single malt that we make, which is delicious.
Now you guys are based in Oregon, which is, for me, it's representative of craft beer. And I believe these single malts tend to be more craft distilleries as well. What pushed you guys to make malt, and is this something recent and something that's picking up in the US?
So Westward is based in Portland, Oregon, which is a brewing mecca for the United States. We have well over 80 breweries in our metro area. This is where most of the hops are grown as well in the country. Up just north of the city is the Yakima Valley. So yeah, we are very, very beer-centric here in the Pacific Northwest. And that directly leads to Westward's appreciation for beer and for single malt and the connection that can be made between those two things. I myself am an ex-brewer, Christian, our founder. Many of our distillers all come from the brewing world here in Portland. And that really inspires a lot of what we do. We are using a brewer's base malt as our barley, and we're also using an ale yeast for fermentation. We're coaxing a lot of flavors out of our whiskey that you could, I'd say, normally associate with a lot of American beer, especially craft pale ale. And that really drives a lot of the flavor that we're producing when we're making Westward. So we, again, pull a lot from the people and the place to make our product, and that includes making Westward in a style that we think is heavily inspired by beer. It is a hybrid of styles, and we are very much looking toward beer for a lot of the flavor that we get out of our whiskey.
And are there any states that are kind of, coming out in the lead with the single malt movement, like we have Kentucky for bourbon, for example?
So we're actually now seeing single malts being made all over the country here in the States. It's very exciting. We've got a little over 200 producers of single malt now in the United States, from the Northeast down through the South, the Midwest and the mountainous ranges there, to the West Coast and down through to the desert near Mexico. But as far as if there is a centralized region for making single malt, I say it's here in the Pacific Northwest. We've got quite a few distilleries here making American single malt, making their style of a single malt. So while it may not be a certain style that everyone adheres to, I'd say in this region here in the Pacific Northwest, again, because most of the barley grown is here in our area, and we're so heavily inspired by beer. There's so many breweries here. And the weather itself, our environment is perfect for aging single malt. So I would say if there is a particular region, then it would be here in the Pacific Northwest.
America also has a malt whiskey category, like it has a rye whiskey, for example, with a minimum of 51% malts, and I believe new oak barrels as well. Now, is new oak barrels, is this then something that is required for single malt whiskey as well? Basically, my question is single malt a subset of malt whiskey? Do the same rules apply?
So here in the US, we again are known for our bourbon, known for our rye. We also have a defined category that is malt whiskey. Now that states your whiskey must be 51% malted barley or more, and your new make should go, actually has to go, into virginal charred white American oak casks. So we're making single malt, which I guess in a general sense you could see as a subset of malt whiskey, but we're taking it further than that. And actually, we've been very instrumental in getting American single malt defined as a category in the United States. We helped form the American Single Malt Commission, which, along with several other American single malt producers, helped define a few rules, some general descriptors for what American single malt should be. And that includes 100% malted barley, produced here in the United States, that is mashed, distilled and aged here in the United States, put into oak containers, not necessarily new, up to 700 liters, and produced by one distillery. So, you know, while we do have some rules in place that we want to make sure are understood by the consumer, we don't want to stifle creativity. And so we've left those rules open enough that people can continue to innovate and craft. You know, we really feel like that's what's very exciting about the category. That's also something that we feel really helped put American craft beer on the map as well. Just people trying new things, experimenting, you know, to express more flavor in different ways that are reimagining what it is.
All right, and so how would you say American single malts tend to differ from Scotch single malts or other single malts from other countries? I mean, you know, we tend to associate a certain style with American whiskey. Does this also carry over to the single malt category? Or is it maybe closer to what we have here in Europe or in the rest of the world, for example? Where would you place it kind of on this continuum of American whiskey versus traditional Scotch single malt, for example?
You know, you could look at Westward as a hybrid of styles in that we are making it like a single malt, something that you could say produced in Scotland, but we're also aging it like a bourbon in that we are putting our new make into brand new virginal charred American oak casks. So it's a hybrid of those two styles in that way. But you know, other single malt producers here in the States, they can experiment in different ways and produce different great delicious American single malts. And so, you know, we again don't want to be too restrictive. We want to make sure that people have the freedom to still make the whiskey that they want to make, but we also want to make sure that when you pick up a bottle of American single malt, you know that it came from one producer, it was made all here, it's from 100% malted barley, and it for sure was aged in oak casks.
All right, well, thanks a lot for giving us all these answers. For those of you watching us at home, thank you, and give us a thumbs up if you like what you see. Follow us for more. The question of the day for the comments is, talking about malt whiskey, we do find some malt whiskey in America other than in the single malt category and the malt whiskey category. Do you think that malt can be found or is found commonly in bourbon or rye, for example? So let us know what you think in the comments, and see you next time.